It all started with a love affair, not with a person, but with cooking, my day job. I was a mid-level data analyst for a huge, respectable, and soul-crushingly boring corporation. My name is Taryn, and my world was a grid of spreadsheets, formulas, and financial projections. I was good at it, but it was sterile, black and white. It paid the bills, but it didn't feed my soul. Cooking, on the other hand, that was my thing. My tiny apartment kitchen was my sanctuary. It was where I could ditch the rigid logic of data and play with the alchemy of flavors. It was where I created things. While my coworkers were zoning out to TV or hitting happy hour, I was simmering a bolognese for 6 hours, or patiently laminating dough for croissants. This wasn't just about food. It was my art. It was the one part of my life that was vibrant and completely mine. And because I put in all that time and effort, my lunches were, frankly, spectacular. They were my midday escape. I'm talking slow-braised short ribs on creamy polenta, hand-rolled pappardelle with a wild mushroom ragu, Moroccan-spiced lamb tagine. These weren't leftovers. They were single-serving masterpieces, and I packed them in these distinctive multi-compartment glass containers that were my small investment in daily happiness. The office was your standard open-plan cubicle farm. The only real social hub was the kitchen, and in that kitchen, the fridge was sacred ground. There was an unwritten code. You just didn't touch what wasn't yours. It was a rule more fundamental than anything in the employee handbook. And then, there was my boss, Richard. To the higher-ups, Richard was a golden boy. Tall, great suit, firm handshake, and a smile that seemed real if you didn't look too closely at his eyes. He could talk for an hour in a meeting without saying a single thing of substance. Upper management thought this was leadership to us. The people who actually worked for him, Richard was a different animal. His charm was a thin shell over a core of pure entitlement. He called everyone champ or buddy because he couldn't be bothered to learn our names, and he had this peculiar belief that his job title gave him an all-access pass to other people's stuff. Looking back, the signs were there. He'd finish the coffee and just walk away. He'd borrow a stapler from your desk and it would just vanish forever. They seemed like small, thoughtless things, but they weren't. They were little ways of saying, the rules don't apply to me. Your things are my things. It was only a matter of time before that roaming entitlement found its way to the office. Fridge. My passion for cooking was on a direct collision course with his appetite for casual theft. The first time it happened, I was more confused than anything. I'd packed this amazing Thai green curry. The smell alone was a promise of a 30-minute vacation. At 12:30, I went to the fridge and my glass container was just gone. I checked everywhere. I figured I must have left it at home. I ate a sad granola bar from my desk drawer, completely bummed out. Later that day, I saw it. My container empty and washed, sitting in the drying rack. No note, no apology, just a silent, weird violation. A week later, it happened again. This time, a slice of my homemade deep dish pizza. A recipe I'd spent months on. I'd been dreaming about it all morning and again, gone. But this time, I got a clue. As I was walking back to my desk, I passed Richard, holding court with some colleagues. He was laughing, patting his stomach. Man, I was starving, he said, loud enough for half the office to hear. But I found the most amazing. Pizza in the fridge, lifesaver. Whoever you are, you're an angel. Then he caught my eye and gave me a slow, deliberate wink. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a mistake. And he was bragging about it, turning it into a cute office story. My coworkers just chuckled nervously. I just stood there, speechless at the sheer audacity, so I started labeling my containers with my full name in huge black letters. The next day, he took my chicken parm. He'd peeled the label off and stuck it to the side of the trash can. My next label read, extremely spicy, do not eat. That afternoon, Richard walked past my desk, fanning his mouth with a grin. Woo, your cooking has a real kick, champ. I like it. I escalated. The next label was a desperate lie, medical meal. For dietary needs, surely nobody would cross that line. That would be pure evil. Well, it turns out Richard was pure evil. He ate it and then had the nerve to give me notes. A little bland, he said, leaning on my cubicle wall. You should let me give you some pointers sometime. Finally, I confronted him directly. I caught him in the kitchen and said, as calmly as I could, Richard, I know you've been enjoying my lunches, but I put a lot of work into them. I'd really appreciate it if you stopped. He turned, faking surprise, and put a hand on my shoulder. Hey, buddy, lighten up, he said. It's just food. We're a team. Sharing is caring. Then he leaned in and dropped his voice to a whisper. Besides, I'm your boss. Consider it a tribute. A little perk of my position. He patted my shoulder twice and walked away, leaving me fuming. It was never about the food. It was a power trip, a daily humiliation. Polite requests had failed. He had declared war. The breaking point came on a Wednesday. It was my birthday. I hate big celebrations at work, so to treat myself, I decided to make a single-serving beef Wellington. The entire weekend was dedicated to this thing. I'd seared a prime filet mignon, made a rich mushroom duxelles, wrapped it all in prosciutto and a flaky buttery puff pastry I'd made from scratch. It was my culinary masterpiece, sitting in the office fridge, a golden brown promise of a perfect birthday lunch. It was more than a meal. It was a gift to myself. The morning dragged on. All I could think about was slicing into that Wellington. At 12:15, I walked to the kitchen, buzzing with anticipation. I opened the fridge, my heart just dropped into my stomach. The shelf was empty. It was gone. My birthday beef Wellington was gone. A cold knot formed in my gut. I knew exactly who took it. I didn't even bother looking for the container. I just walked back to my desk in a daze. The happy birthday emails from my family felt like a sick joke. The anger wasn't hot anymore. It went cold. Ice-cold. Later that afternoon, the final insult. Richard was by the elevators talking loudly with other managers. "You will not believe the lunch I had today," he boomed. "Some kind of fancy steak thing wrapped in pastry. Must have been left over from a catered meeting. One of the perks of the job, right?" Finding these little treasures, he let out that loud, obnoxious laugh of his. He hadn't just stolen my lunch. He'd stolen my birthday gift to myself and then dismissed all my work as a random perk. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The line had been obliterated. This was no longer about food. The quiet, meticulous analyst in me merged with that cold anger. The game was on. My first thought was revenge, pure and simple. I wanted to lace his next meal with the hottest ghost pepper extract I could find. I pictured him taking a big bite. The look of horror on his face, the chaos, the thought made me smile. I even bought a tiny, evil-looking bottle of it online, but as I was holding it, the analyst in me kicked in. I started thinking it through. What if he had an allergic reaction, or a heart condition? I could be fired, sued, or even face criminal charges. My revenge had to be smarter. It needed to dismantle his career, not just ruin his afternoon. I put the pepper extract away. The new plan was built on data. I needed cold, hard, undeniable proof. A video. I went online and found the perfect tool. A tiny black cube, no bigger than a sugar cube, sold as a nanny cam. It was perfect. I picked it up from an Amazon locker, feeling like a spy on a mission. I codenamed it Operation Lunch Liberation. Planting it was tricky. The best spot was a storage alcove next to the kitchen. One of the shelves had a perfect clear view of the fridge. The next morning, I came in early, my heart pounding. I pretended to look for an old binder and tucked the tiny camera between a dusty report from 2012 and a stack of old letterhead. The first few days were torture. I fast-forwarded through hours of footage of my colleagues making coffee and microwaving sad meals. I felt ridiculous. But then I'd remember the beef Wellington and my resolve would harden. On Thursday, I hit the jackpot. The timestamp read 12:05 p.m. There was Richard. He stopped at the kitchen entrance, scanned the office like a predator, and then moved straight to the fridge. The camera caught everything: his face, his smug smirk, him opening the door, finding my container of lasagna, and slipping it into his fancy briefcase. I watched the clip 3 times. A wave of pure vindication washed over me. I had him, smoking. Gun? But as the excitement faded, I had another thought. Was this really enough? If I took this to HR, he'd lie. He'd say I gave him permission. They might just give him a slap on the wrist. The risk of it backfiring was too high. I needed to establish a pattern so clear, so undeniable that no one could ignore it. The hunt was back on. My mission had changed. I needed a portfolio of his crimes. I started a new, highly confidential spreadsheet on my personal laptop. I called it the Richard Protocol. I became obsessed with his routine. I used my analyst skills to track his every move: when he arrived, how long his coffee breaks were, who he met with. I was trying to pinpoint when he committed his lunch crimes, and in doing that, I started noticing other things. Weird things. For example, he had a client meeting in his calendar every Wednesday afternoon with a company called Stellar Solutions. Just for kicks, I looked them up in our system. They were listed as inactive. We hadn't worked with them in over 3 years. So, who was he meeting? Then there were his supply runs. Richard, a guy who acted like making coffee was beneath him, would personally leave the office to pick up urgent supplies. He was always gone for at least 2 hours, and his expense reports were always vague. I got my biggest clue one Tuesday evening. I was staying late and went to grab my spy camera. The office was mostly empty, but Richard was still in his office with the door cracked open. He was on the phone and his voice was tight and angry. I hid in the alcove and listened. "I don't care about your production issues," he hissed. "The materials are what they are. Just make sure the invoice looks clean, the full amount. We can't have any discrepancies." There was a pause. "Listen," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I'm taking all the risk here. Just make sure the deposit hits the Shell account by Friday. No delays." Shell account. My blood ran cold. In my world, Shell account is a giant flashing red light for fraud. I stood there in the dark, the tiny camera feeling heavy in my hand. This was so much bigger than lunch. The petty theft was just a symptom of a much deeper rot. Richard wasn't just a bully who stole food, he was a criminal, and my obsessive lunch-fueled spying had just made me the only witness. Suddenly, my whole focus shifted. Operation Lunch Liberation was over. This was Operation Trojan Horse. My personal grudge felt tiny now. This was about millions of dollars, but the risk was huge. Exposing a lunch thief is one thing. Trying to expose a high-level fraudster could get me fired and blacklisted. I had to be flawless. My analyst brain took over. I started digging into the company's financial data. I ran queries on Richard's department, looking for patterns. It didn't take long. One vendor, Apex Solutions, stood out. Richard's department had been paying them 25 to 40% more for raw materials than any other supplier. On top of that, I found a trail of quality control reports from engineers complaining that the components from Apex were garbage. And on every single report, Richard had personally signed off, overriding the complaint. He was knowingly buying junk at premium prices. The picture was becoming terrifyingly clear. Richard was in bed with Apex. He'd approved their inflated invoices, and they'd kick back a percentage of the profits into that Shell account he'd mentioned. I needed one final, undeniable piece of proof. I got it a week later. Richard was out at his fake Stellar Solutions meeting. I forgot my security badge at my desk and came back when the office was quiet. As I walked past Richard's locked office, I saw his personal trash can was overflowing. Right on top was a crumpled piece of paper. My heart was hammering. I glanced around. Nobody. I snatched the paper and booked it to the nearest bathroom stall. My hands were shaking as I smoothed it out. It was a draft of an invoice from Apex Solutions, and scrawled in the margins in Richard's unmistakable handwriting were calculations. Next to the grand total of over $300,000, he had written, "Wire, 15% too," followed by an account number, and under that, the account name, Baywater Holdings LLC. A quick search on my phone revealed that Baywater Holdings LLC was a registered company, the sole owner, his wife using her maiden name. I had him. I had it all. That night, I compiled the dossier. It was the most important report of my life. Section 1. The character. A summary of the lunch thefts, with a link to the video. This established his pattern of unethical behavior. Section 2. The scheme. I laid out the Apex fraud with price comparisons and the quality control complaints he buried. Section 3. The proof. A high-res photo of the crumpled invoice with his notes. Section 4. The conspiracy. The registration documents for his wife's company, cross-referenced with the dates of his supply runs and payments to Apex. It was a perfect match. The final report was a clinical, factual, and utterly damning case. He thought he was untouchable. He had underestimated the obsessive analyst whose lunch he had stolen one too many times. With the dossier ready, it was time to light the fuse. I went to a public library in another town, created an anonymous email account, and uploaded the file. The subject line was impossible to ignore. Urgent and confidential. Documentation of financial fraud in product development. The email was short. To whom it may concern, please find attached a report detailing a multi-year fraud scheme orchestrated by Mr. Richard Knight. The evidence is conclusive. I am submitting this anonymously for my professional safety. My finger hovered over the send button. This was it. I addressed it to the company's chief compliance officer, a woman with a reputation for being a shark-hand ICCD, the CEO. I took a deep breath and clicked send. A week passed, then another. Silence. Richard was still his smug, insufferable self. He even stole my sandwich one day. A cold dread started creeping in. What if they just ignored it? Then, on a Tuesday morning, the mood in the office shifted. 3 people in dark suits that screamed corporate legal walked off the elevator and went straight into the main conference room. A few minutes later, my department head was called in. Then the head of HR. The door closed. The entire office fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. We all just pretended to work, our eyes glued to that glass door. An hour crawled by. Finally, the receptionist, Chloe, got up and walked with this slow, deliberate pace across the office. The click of her heels was deafening. She stopped at Richard's desk. "Richard," she whispered. "They need you in the conference room." I watched his face. For the first time, I saw a flicker of confusion. He clearly thought it was just some boring meeting. He sighed, stood up, straightened his tie, and strolled into the conference room. The door clicked shut. That was at 10:30 a.m. He never came out. At 4:15 p.m., the door finally opened. The three suits walked out first, their faces grim, then our department head looking pale. Finally, Richard emerged. I couldn't believe the change in him. The swagger was gone, his face was gray and sweaty, his expensive suit looked rumpled, his eyes were wide and blank. The HR manager was right beside him. She silently followed him to his desk and handed him an empty cardboard box. The walk of shame had begun. In total silence, as the entire department stared, Richard started packing his things. His hands fumbled with his pictures, his world's best boss mug. He didn't look at anyone. When he was done, the HR manager and a security guard escorted him to the elevator. The doors slid shut and he was gone. The second those elevator doors closed, the office exploded in frantic whispers. 15 minutes later, the official email landed, announcing that Richard has left the company, effective immediately, to pursue other opportunities. Nobody believed that for a second. My work friend Brenda, who knows everything about everyone, got the real story from a cousin in the legal department. My anonymous tip had set off a firestorm. The CEO had ordered a top-secret investigation. The suits were a forensics team. Apparently, they confronted Richard with my dossier. He tried to bluff for about 10 minutes, but the evidence was so perfect, so complete, that he just fell apart and confessed to everything. The fraud was even bigger than I'd found, closer to $5 million over 4 years. The company was pressing criminal charges. He hadn't just lost his job. He'd torched his entire life. In the weeks that followed, the whole department changed. The woman who had been Richard's second in command, Maria Sharp, competent person he had constantly undermined, was promoted to his job. The toxic cloud of fear lifted. People started sharing ideas again. The whole culture shifted. About a month later, I was sitting at my desk. I opened my lunch container. Inside was a perfect piece of pansered salmon with crispy skin, on a bed of quinoa and roasted asparagus. I took a bite. It was delicious, and that was the real victory. Not just his spectacular downfall. It was this moment. The simple, uninterrupted pleasure of eating my own lunch, the quiet, peaceful, and delicious taste of justice. He had tried to take a small piece of my life to make himself feel big, and in the end, he handed me everything I needed to destroy his. He started a war over a sandwich, and he lost everything. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments, what would you have done? What's the craziest thing a boss has ever done to you? I read all the comments, and I can't wait to hear your stories. Thanks for watching.